Welcome to the Senate Standing Committee on National Security and Defense on Monday, February the 23rd, 2015. Before we welcome our witness, I would like to begin by introducing the people around the table. My name is Dan Lang, Senator for Yukon. On my immediate left is the Clerk of the Committee, José Terrien. I'd like to go around the table and invite each Senator to introduce themselves and state the region they represent, starting with our Deputy Chair.
Grant Mitchell, Alberta.
I'm sorry. Senator Dagenet from Quebec.
Carolyn Stewart Olson from New Brunswick.
Senator Ngo from Ontario.
Ça doit être moi, Sénateur Joseph Day du Nouveau-Brunswick.
Sergeant Joseph Day from New Brunswick.
Vern White, Ontario.
Thank you, colleagues. Colleagues, on June the 19th, 2014, the Senate agreed to the following: that the Senate Standing Committee on National Security and Defense be authorized to study and report on security threats facing Canada, including, but not limited to, A. Cyber espionage, B. Threats to critical infrastructure, C. Terrorist recruitment and financing, D. Terrorist operations and prosecutions, and that the committee report to the Senate no later than December 31st, 2015. Today we will be meeting for our full 4 hours. Before we commence with our witness, I wish to recall that on October the 27th, this committee raised with the RCMP Commissioner the subject of releasing the video of Mr. Bibeau, the terrorist and radicalized jihadist who attacked Parliament Hill. The facts that are known are as follows. Mr. Bibeau's father had fought with the radicals in Libya. Mr. Bibeau replied for a visa to go to Libya just weeks before and was denied. Mr. Bibeau had taken a tour of Parliament Hill prior to the attack, and Mr. Bibeau had also went out to obtain a rifle days before the attack, and his name also was found on a computer of a known terrorist. Given what we know, I would like to advise the committee that I'll be writing to the Commissioner to have the video released as soon as the investigation by the RCMP has concluded. Colleagues, thank you. I will now ask the clerk, Now to our first panelist. I'd like to welcome to the committee Mr. Marc Lebuis. Mr. Marc Lebuis is the founding director of the Montreal-based independent research organization Point de Bascule, which means tipping point, that describes and analyzes the threats, methods, and means used by some Islamist leaders and organizations operating in Canada to further their goals. Point de Bascule, in consultation with its Muslim community advisors, archives numerous collections, indices, regularly updating each documented specific component of Islamist structures in Canada. These indexes include organizations, individuals, government agencies, and specific countries relevant to the Islamist movement and its mode of operation. Other ongoing areas of research are radicalization, outreach programs, counter-radicalization programs, terrorist fund collectors and their links with charities, and the impact of Islamist sympathizers on the legal system, including with respect to policing and other sensitive government institutions. Mr. Lebuis has frequently appeared on CBC, CTV, TVA, and LCN, and has been quoted in the National Post, Le Devoir, La Presse, Journal de Montreal, the Montreal Gazette, Ottawa Citizen, the Sun Media, and is often featured on in radio stations in Montreal, Quebec City, Ottawa, Toronto, and Western Canada. Mr. Lebuis, you're very busy. Mr. Lebuis, welcome to the committee. We appreciate the work you're doing, and we're looking forward to your presentation. Please begin.
Thank you for having me. Well, thank you to the Honourable Chair and Senators for giving me the opportunity to address the issue of radicalization that Canada faces at this point in time. Recent Islamic terror attacks in Ottawa and Saint-Jean reminds us of the mounting terrorist threat facing Canadians. But evidence gathered by Point Bascule indicates that the main danger facing Canada may go beyond the violent jihadist threat and made worse by a little discussed associated phenomena, the penetration of our institution by Islamists. There are two consequences to this penetration. First, it reduces Canada's ability to respond to the violent Islamist threat, and secondly, it leads to the gradual introduction of Sharia rules in Canada. By penetration, I refer to the presence of Islamists, their sympathizers with a range of institutions from political and government organizations to NGOs and corporate entities. Those involved that themselves range from non-violent fundamentalists attempting, whether clandestinely or otherwise, to sway policy from the inside, to those that are violently inclined. Particular concerns have been raised about sabotage risks that could be posed to the penetration of security or emergency services. No small worry when one considers that the Muslim Brotherhood revealed in a document produced for evidentiary purposes in the most important anti-terrorism trial in the U.S. in 2008, an excerpt from what is described as an internal memorandum of the Muslim Brotherhood. And I quote, and this comes from their own memorandum: "The Ikhwan must understand that their work in America is a kind of grand jihad, in eliminating and destroying the Western civilization from within and sabotaging its miserable house by their hands and the hands of the believers." There is no time for a detailed analysis of penetration problems in Canada and the Western world, but one might consider a few examples illustrating the diverse risk connected to the penetration and the ideas that helped shape the call to such actions. In 2012, Saudi-trained Sheikh Bilal Phillips appeared at Ottawa's As-Salam Mosque, despite having been banned from several countries on national security grounds, and for his advocacy of the death penalty for gays in Muslim lands. Yet weeks later, the Ottawa Police Service participated in a police outreach visit to the mosque and were soon undertaking to do recruiting sessions there. Earlier, in the United States, Wise Razul, a Virginia police sergeant, was convicted after allegedly using a police computer to determine whether he was being monitored and offering official information to a fellow mosque congregant who was trying to find out whether surveillance cars were in the latter vicinity, likely undermining a counterterrorism investigation. Razul has been prominent in complaining about terrorism briefing, as had another officer, a representative of the Radical Council on American Islamic Relations. Leading influential Islamist leaders have specifically targeted Canada, giving guidance that leads to the examples I just described. In the early 2000s, Jamal Badawi, a senior leader of the Muslim Brotherhood operating in Canada, said that at the present stage, Muslims should agree to become judges and officials in Canada, even though the country is not governed by Sharia or Islamic law. He declared that once they become judges and government officials, they should take advantage of their position of influence to stop applying current national legal provisions that are incompatible with Sharia law. In 2004, the executive director of the National Council of Canadian Muslims, formerly known as CARECAN, told the Senate Committee on Transport and Communication that Jamal Badawi, and I quote, is generally understood to be perhaps one of the best North American Islamic scholars, if not the premier. And again in 2004, in an interview with Egypt Today, Tariq Ramadan followed in the same footstep when he incited co-Islamists operating in the country to use the Canadian legal framework, which he referred to as one of the most open in the world, to subtly and gradually introduce Sharia guidelines and regulations in Canada. At the time, Ramadan strongly urged his supporters in Canada not to openly mention their commitment to Sharia. The term Sharia, he says, is laden with negative connotation in the Western mind, he says. There is no need to stress that, he says. For the time being, this is not how we want to be perceived, he added. In 2003 in Detroit, Tariq Ramadan defined jihad as, quote, the way in which we implement Sharia, end of quote. This formulation has the advantage of including violent and non-violent methods used by Islamists to reach their goal. What defines the radicalization phenomena is it must include a desire by Islamists to transform the society in which they operate, in their home country, in our case, Canada, often achieved through non-violent means. In recent years, Then this non-violent Islamist threat has manifested itself in pressure being exerted on our police forces, security agencies, Canadian politicians, and the workings of other institutions. As an example, one can think about the collaboration between the National Council of Canadian Muslim with the RCMP, which preceded the publication of a booklet in 2014, allegedly dedicated to combating radicalization, but at the same time advocating several scholars promoting armed jihad. On June 8, 2012, a delegation of Islamist leaders linked to the Muslim Brotherhood infrastructure operating in Canada met with then Minister of Public Safety, Vic Taze. The delegation was led by Hussein Hamdani, an advisor to the Department of Public Safety, as a member of the Cross-Cultural Roundtable on Security. The report of the meeting was made public at the end of June 2012 on Saya Nassid's website, where Mr. Nassid claimed to have directly received the information from Hussein Hamdani himself. In June 2012, Saya Nassid was Irfan Canada's lawyer, the Hamas fund collector in Canada. In his PowerPoint presentation, Hussein Hamdani lobbied Minister Taze to ban his department's employees from making any references whatsoever to Islam and its principles to describe the threat that Canada and other Western democracies are facing. This position was adopted by CSIS after Michel Coulombe became its director in 2013. Mr. Coulombe raised this new policy when he appeared in front of the Standing Senate Committee on the National Security and Defense on February 3, 2014. According to the CSIS director, his organization no longer refers to the Islamic concepts such as jihad to describe the Islamist threat, but is instead limited to talking about, quote, terrorism inspired by the ideology of Al-Qaeda, end of quote. This is exactly the policy that Hussein Hamdani championed and wanted to see adopted in 2012. The CSIS decision is bad because, firstly, it limits the Islamist threat to its violent aspect, and secondly, it discourages the study of works of Islamic scholars, including Sharia manual endorsed by those who threaten us, since these texts and speeches are based on references based in Islam. As Stephen Coughlin, a former Pentagon advisor now with the Washington-based Center for Security Policy, explained, even if the enemy has a wrong understanding of Islam, it is still using it to threaten us. In these circumstances, for our own protection, it is crucial to master its doctrine, its understanding of Islam. In a second phase, it is important to evaluate how widespread is this interpretation of Islam in order to determine the magnitude of the threat. Mr. Hamdani is also in a conflict of interest position in his role as an advisor on national security matters, since he has been associated with 3 organizations whose charitable status has been revoked in recent years by the Canadian Revenue Agency due to their involvement in the financing of international terrorism. CSIS's decision to cease reference to Islam in describing the threat that faces us has also led to the agency's conclusion that mosques are foreign to the radicalization process that prevails in the Muslim community. On October 24, 2014, when appearing before a Senate committee, CSIS's Deputy Director of Intelligence, Michael Pierce, said, and I quote, "When we investigate individuals and their activities. We do not investigate mosques," end of quotes. This decision by CSIS neglects to take into account the pivotal role of the mosque as it is understood by the Islamists themselves, and ignores the numerous documented case of radical discourses preached in mosques reported in recent years and weeks. Hassan al-Banna, for example, the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, considered the mosque as, quote, the center of Islamic revolution, end of quote. It is a serious miscalculation and a grave mistake that endangers the safety and security of Canadians to acquiesce to or accept the enemy's rules of engagement that are being imposed by the invocation of Islamophobia, defamation of religion, or any other concepts. To understand the offensive led by the Islamists in both its violence and non-violent aspect, to understand the meaning they give to the concepts such as jihad, the role they accord to the mosque, the importance they attach to immigration and demographic, and their plans of conquest, and to understand the conditions that allow them to justify the use of force, it is imperative that we do not rely on what they themselves tell us, but rather we must undertake ourselves with due diligence to read, study, and analyze what the works and speeches of their own scholars and the Sharia textbooks which they endorse say on these vital issues. I would like to thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Lebuis. We'll start with the Deputy Chair.
Thanks. I don't really know where to start, actually. I think you're making, Mr. Lebuis, some very, very, very sweeping allegations based on anecdotal evidence, which implies that somehow the few anecdotal people you've mentioned actually have influence with the one with radicalizing many, many, many Muslims in Canada. There are 1.3 million Muslims in Canada. They're like 99.999999999% of them are like me, and I presume you. They love their kids. They played hockey with my kids. They want them to grow up. They want peace. They go to their mosque as you go to your church to enhance their spiritual life, to make themselves better people, to grow their families better, to contribute better to their community. And you're implying in what you're saying that somehow there is something unique about their religion that would make them all violent. And I want to say that's unacceptable, and that rhetoric is extremely dangerous. Having said that, can you give me, us, any intellectual, academic, empirical evidence that somehow there is, whatever these few people are saying, and some of them are even U.S. examples, have somehow created mass radicalization? And if so, what's the mechanism? How's that happening? Are all these people listening to it? Are all these good Canadians listening to this? I just don't believe it. I think you're making it up.
Well, thank you very much for...
Mr. Lebuis has the floor.
Yes, thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Well, this was an introductory presentation. The time was very, very limited, so to go into the details. But in terms of evidence, first of all, I work with Muslims, and these Muslims are extremely concerned and alerted a lot of people about the radicalization process that is occurring in mosque. And this, by the way, this has been going on since the early 90s. There are recorded documents and recorded evidence to show this. So there is a real concern about the radicalization process that is going on in mosque. Secondly, there's a lot of the individuals that have been going on to join the Islamic State that have also been inside of mosque. Now the goal here is I'm not at all wiping off and saying that all Muslims or the religion itself is a problem. Like I said, I quoted how we should be understanding the specific ideology of Islam that we're talking about. We're talking about, some people just recently said about the mosque. Let me just describe here, just to be clear, that there's a scholar who is very often quoted as being a moderate leader, a moderate scholar. And I can tell you that in most Sunni mosques in Canada, his books are being referred to as a reference. He is banned in several countries, and he is the foremost leader of the Muslim Brotherhood as we are speaking now. His name is Yusuf al-Qaradawi. He has been described by certain key Muslims as being akin to a pope in terms of his influence to the Sunni world. And Yusuf Qaradawi described the role of the mosque in these words in 2001. In the life of the Prophet, there was no distinction between what the people call sacred and secular, religion and politics, that established a precedent for his religion. The mosque at the time of the Prophet was his propagation center and the headquarters of the state. This was also the case for the successors of the rightly guided caliphs. The mosque was their base for all activities, political as well as non-political. It must be the role of the mosque to guide the public policy of a nation, raise awareness of critical issue, and reveal its enemies. Now there's another scholar that's very important. He was the chair of the Islamic Studies of Alberta. He's also was very, very oftentimes invited in some of the mainstream organizations that we're having in Canada in the circuits of giving conferences. His name is Ibrahim Abu Rabi. And he wrote a book on Hassan al-Banna. Hassan al-Banna, if you read the recent recent news, recent reports, we do understand that the Muslim Association of Canada, as well as ISNA, has ties to the Muslim Brotherhood, and they're perhaps, and they are described as maybe the largest owners of the real estate park that owns the institution, Islamic institution in Canada. And the Muslim Brotherhood is the inspiration for both, the guiding force of both of these most important Islamic institution in Canada. This being said, he described that Hassan al-Banna has transformed the role of the mosque from a place of worship into a center of revolution. Now, at the time where we're having hundreds of people who are joining the Islamic State, and we're wondering why all these people are joining, we can use a term, the headhunters of the Islamic State out there, not just limited in Syria and Iraq. We're wondering why, what could have radicalized them. And very often when these people are, Mr. Rouleau, for example, right after he did his crime, his terror attack, and killed and wounded 2 soldiers and killed one of them, he took the time to call the 911 while he was being chased by the police to say that he was doing this in the name of Allah. So we do need to understand what their motivations are. In his own mosque that he attended. Now, if he was exposed to this individual, that is another question. However, in the mosque that he was attending in Saint-Jean, there was an imam called Hamza Shawi. This imam preaches in French, broadcast is preaching in French on YouTube after he goes into every single mosque where he was giving sermons. This individual is teaching exactly the same ideology as the Islamic State, talking about cutting hands, cutting feet, the prescription that you apply inside an Islamic State. The only beef he has with the Islamic State, it's because it's not controlled by Saudi Arabia, as he said in some of his videos. And what we should be concerned when we're seeing an individual like this is not this individual, is not this preacher who's radicalizing, who's giving a radical speech. It's the fact that there's a huge infrastructure that invited this individual. We're talking dozens of mosques in Quebec. Yes, the Asuna Mosque, a mosque related to the Mac. And by the way, the mosque related to the Mac, again, we're talking about radical discourse. There's an Imam Kandil, who's the main leader of the Muslim Association Mosque in Montreal. In the summer of 2013, 1 year before we learned about the Islamic State, was giving a discourse in front of what most probably was hundreds of people. And in this discourse, he was basically describing the advantage and how we prescribe specific rules of Sharia prescription in the Islamic State, and describe different ways and means and methods of how you kill somebody who wants to leave Islam. Now, this is a mainstream imam in one of the most important mosques in Montreal.
So I mean, you're saying many mosques. I just can't accept it. But unless you can give us empirical evidence that somehow, you know, you're giving, again, it's anecdotal and it's it can be very misleading. But my question is, to the extent that something's occurring and some have been radicalized. Interestingly enough, Rouleau didn't grow up in a mosque. So if he were radicalized, it must have started before he ever got anywhere near a mosque to make that decision. It's a psychological issue, which raises all kinds of issues. So how do we solve it? Do you solve it with programs? Do we solve it with policing, which raises the issue of resources to police forces that's had their resources cut, their budgets cut? Do we solve it with laws? How do we prevent it before it gets to? Are you saying we throw these imams out of the country? Are you saying, and how do you do that? What are you saying? What's the solution?
Mr. Lebuis.
Thank you. Well, Mr. Senator, there's an interesting evidence that's happened around Rouleau. There was an interview that was done by the CBT interviewing the father of Mr. Rouleau. And the RCMP went to go see Martin Ahmed Rouleau, actually once or twice, to de-radicalize him. And there were 2 or 3 employees of the RCMP of Muslim extractions, female, according to the father of Mr. Rouleau. He thought that they would be able to de-radicalize him, and just several days later, he still did what he had to do. So that's an example of the programs that there was in. And also, by the way, we also knew of Mr. Rouleau before it happened. And according to the president of the mosque that Rouleau attended, there was also, according to the president, I don't know if this has been confirmed by the RCMP or not, but there was an employee of the RCMP who is a congregant who is attending that mosque as well, which, if it's true...
Nothing wrong with that.
I didn't say there was anything wrong. But all I'm saying, if it's true, it would be interesting to know if this individual alerted the RCMP that there was a radical imam preaching at this mosque or not. But that's another subject for now. The point being here, the question that you're asking me, is it widespread and there's no empirical evidence? Well, there are evidence.
I'm asking for empirical evidence.
Well, there is evidence. First of all, the sermons were given for this specific individuals in several mosques. They were posted on his own YouTube, and they were confirmed by several of the individuals and the people who invited him in their venues to be able to preach, which allows us to ask the question: why did they seem pertinent to invite such a radical individual who is now rejected by some of these same mosques? Suddenly, they thought it was pertinent a couple of weeks ago in the last year. And now suddenly when he's exposed in the media, because there's a mosque, by the way, that was not permitted to be, an Islamic center that was not permitted to be open in Montreal, because there was an intervention by the mayor because of the radical preaching that this individual was, because of the correlation between what he's preaching and not. So this being said, no, I am not talking about all Muslims. I work with Muslims. And like I said, they are concerned. And some of them came here. They came here, they're trying to alert us for several years that there's a massive problem. And the problem that we're having also is a lot of these institutions are controlled and financed, proven, and there's evidence to demonstrate it, and it's all over the newspapers. There's proven evidence that they're funded by countries who are known to harbor the most radical fringes of Islam, the Wahhabism fringes, for example. I mean, just recently, again, there's the head of the military that was reported to have just said who just basically declared that in England we are having a major problem, and one of the problems is the very people who are asking us to go help them fend off and fight the Islamic State are also the same people who are spreading an ideology that is basically causing this problem. So this is getting more and more often. In France, for example, Le Monde just published an article a couple of weeks ago after the massive Charlie Hebdo terrorist attack. And by the way, this was just the end and the tip of a long string of terror attack, because there were some also in France just before Christmas. And now they're coming to the conclusion that they're not being radicalized on the internet. They need to be face-to-face in front of mentors. They need to have had the establishment of the seed of the ideology. Now, whether or not this is every Muslim is not the question here, because it doesn't take a lot of people to be able to do the worst that could happen in terms of security threat. What we do know is we need to assess how widespread the nonviolent aspect, which unrolls the carpet later on to be able to allow certain of these imams to be able to recruit, influence, and sow the seed of the ideology that is now showing its face all over the world. And also, I would like to add that in Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia were considered to be extremely moderate states not long ago. And this is not anymore a reality over there. And these words are coming from Kwan Lee, the founder of Singapore, who, when he created the independence of Malaysia and later on the partition of Singapore, he had no problems working with Muslims. They were not radicals. He would take beer with them. They would be able to talk about politics. They wanted to establish a democracy and be free from British rule and establish the common law. He does recognize that in the last year, through the influence of petrodollars, the ideology that comes from the Gulf state is spreading all over and it's creating a cancer. And we won't be able to beat this only on the military side or only addressing the violent side alone. He used the term, we need to be able to find where the queen bee is. And the queen bee is the mentors, those who are radicalizing, the preachers who are spreading this.
Thank you. So you
Very
would
quick,
say,
Senator Mitchell.
but it's also not just, for example, in Fort McMurray, a young Muslim man was shot through the door. We don't know what the motivation was, but we know that it was known that only Muslims lived in that apartment. It could be that radicalization is occurring against them as well, against Muslim people as well. I just think we have to be, do you not agree that we have to be extremely careful? What we want to find out is get to the root of whoever is being radicalized. And I think we have to be very, very careful that of the rhetoric that we use and how we could be painting one group in a way that alienates them further, that could alienate them, not further, but could alienate them, and that is extremely demeaning and inappropriately demeaning to 1.3 million great Muslim Canadians who work to build this country every day, like everybody else in this room and watching.
Mr. Lebuis?
I share your concerns, but the problem is we're going to have to make a distinction on those who are a threat to our society. And I'm not here to talk about those who are not the problem. How many are there? I don't know. That's not the issue. The issue is to be able to find out what is the cause of radicalization. And if we do not name the problem, and if we don't look in their own text, in their own book, this is a Sharia manual. This is not the Quran. This book is endorsed by the Muslim Brotherhood. This is translated in English. And this English translation is approved by the Al-Azhar University, which I would compare to the Vatican of the Sunni world. And in this book, they give specific restriction on how to apply jihad. I have also a Quran that was spread by the Saudi government. This is just the front page of this Quran. This Quran was spread all over, given freely by the Saudi government. Let me read you an annotation. I'm not talking here, just so we're very clear that you're telling me. I'm not telling you that this is generalized and this comes from the Quran. What I'm saying is that there's an annotation in there that is added by the Saudi government. And here's what it says. The Hilalical Quran is given, this is a specific passage that talks about jihad, and they add an annotation for the people who read it to make sure that they really understand the right understanding of jihad. And it says, jihad, the Islamic holy war, these are their words, not mine, in Allah's cause, with full force of numbers and weaponry, their words, not mine, is given to the utmost important in Islam and is one of the pillars in which it stands. By jihad, Islam is established, Allah's words is made superior, and His religion, Islam, is propagated. By abandoning jihad, may Allah protect us from that, Islam is destroyed and the Muslims fall into an inferior position. Their honor is lost, their lands are stolen, their rule and authority vanish. And this is how they finished. Again, I repeat, this is the annotation for people to understand how they should understand the Quran. Jihad is an obligatory duty in Islam in every Muslim, and he who tries to escape from this duty or does not in his innermost heart wish to fulfill this duty dies with one of the qualities of a hypocrite.
So I guess we shouldn't be selling them military vehicles.
Other questions? Senator Stuart Olson.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lebuis, for coming. I appreciate what you're saying and the work that you put into this. In your, I'm just going to reference some of the things that I'm curious about. You've raised concerns about what's taking place in the pre-criminal space, or what the New York Police Department refers to as the space where radicalization is incubated. Can you tell us why you think it's important for us to look at that space, and also what do you think we can learn from studying the individuals who are doing the radicalization?
Well, right now, first of all, those space, the NYPD had a report, and by the way, there was a de-radicalization booklet that was done by the NCCM, and inside this booklet they also refer to the NYPD report. However, there was one section in this report of the NYPD where it says that the Muslim Students Association in North America, which, by the way, most Muslim Students Association there's a head office based in the United States. They cater both Canada and the United States. And it's a little bit like having a franchise versus a corporate type of MSA. So some of them follow the guidelines from this national, they call it the National MSA. And what they define, the New York Police Department, is that these MSAs are incubators of radicalism. And for proof over here, locally, in Canada, what's interesting is in Manitoba, for example, there was an individual who was condemned for terrorism, and he was the president of a Muslim Students Association of Manitoba a few years ago. And we were able to find out later on that his name was actually briefed to two presidents of the United States I think it was under Bill Clinton and George Bush. And later on, he was accused formally because he was not only recruiting, but he was also training recruits to join Al-Qaeda forces in Pakistan. We have had just recently, when we were able to uncover the cell, the MSA, the Ottawa cell. One of these leading figures was also known in the past to have been inspected. I forget his name, but he was part also of a Muslim Students Association of a university in Ontario, and he just was able to spread and do what is proselytism as well, and he just became not only a recruiter, but we were able to find out that he was also an enabler and might have facilitated also funding of those who wanted to go join the Islamic State. There's a lot of example. For example, there's a Muslim Students Association in Concordia University. About 2 years ago, there was an extremely radical individual by the name of Rahim Green that came to Montreal. He was the object of a debate at the National Assembly of Quebec because of his radical views. And he's not just talking about condoning wife beating, but he was also prescribing extremely violent means and the use of violence where he came from in England. Now, this being said, when he came here, was the object of a debate because people were concerned about this radicalization process. He was invited by the Concordia Muslim Students Association. His discourse are all over YouTube. They were already known. And when a reporter from the Link, the newspaper, the newspaper of the university, when the journalist went to go see the president, Mr. Turaya, and asked him what he thought and did he check the background of these individuals, he says, I checked the background, I didn't see anything wrong about what he's preaching. And we've seen a lot of this. Also with the, when I was referring to the Al-Iman Mosque in Saint-Jean, it's the same thing. There was another spokesperson that was recorded by La Presse who knew about the Hamza Shawi coming to preach in her mosque. And they're making headlines. His preaching was broadcast on the radios, on the airwaves. It really was a dramatic scene because people were really concerned. These terrorist attacks happened almost when Ottawa is almost at the border of Quebec, so everybody's feel the stench. This being said, she said that his discourse were brought up to her, to the spokesperson, and she says she didn't see anything wrong, and she didn't feel that his discourse was radical. So I'm not sure if I addressed part of your question.
You have. I think the main point, and I think in some of your answers to Senator Mitchell as well, you drew a distinction between Muslims and Islamists, and I think what you are suggesting is that vigilance is necessary for the preservation of democracy, and that our ancestors were extremely vigilant. You know, we have a country that is open and welcoming to people of all faiths, all religions, all walks of life, but all of us have to be vigilant to keep it that way.
I will also say that this vigilance will come also by making an effort to understand and make some distinctions An Islamist is definitely somebody who has chosen to be militant. Now, it may be violent or non-violent, but an Islamist is somebody who's a militant. A Muslim does not necessarily mean that you become a militant. So there's a lot of people who actually practice their religion as if all of us understand the role of a religion, or how we practice a religion at home, or in our temples, or our churches, or in mosques and synagogues.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Chair.
Senator White.
Thank you very much. Thank you for being here today as well, sir. I understand that you've raised some concerns about the RCMP outreach initiative, in particular on de-radicalization. I wonder if you could walk us through your concerns and maybe even a little bit of specifically your concerns, but maybe a bit about where you think we should be going if we're going the wrong way.
Okay.
Please.
We're having something that is called, and it's starting to become intermingle, but there used to be something called the outreach program, which we still name that way. And now we're more and more talking about de-radicalization. And by the way, de-radicalization is not a new term. It was there in 2006, the fear of radicalization. So we're basically repeating, with a little more concern than before, with an increase in the danger. We're simply repeating what we've been debating almost a decade ago. So one of the concerns that I'm having is there's in some of these programs, we're seeing RCMP officers visiting some venues, which could be mosque, Islamic centers, or even outside, or some groups or organization, and they're dialoguing, and they're doing much more, I would say, cultural exchange, and they're building confidence and trust. I think I have a definition here by the RCMP that I can get to you. It says over here on their own website, community outreach is based on the philosophy that effective counter-radicalization programming is about promoting a community that is tolerant and inclusive, and not about targeting specific ideologies and beliefs. And I'd like to repeat that last point, not about targeting specific ideologies and beliefs. The problem that we've had several incidents that are extremely disconcerting, I would believe, to put it at best. For example, just recently after the 2 terrorist attacks that we've gone through, we've had a de-radicalization event that took place in a university in Ontario. Doug Best was invited, and the 2 people that were on each side of him, one of them was Faisal Kuti, and the other one was Robert Mohammed Best. Now, this was the poster of Mr. Best alongside, I'm supposed to have the poster here, I'm very sorry. But the announcement is very clear. So we had Faisal Kuti right beside Mr. Best, and Doug Best has a very, very important role within the RCMP in terms of security, as in charge of the concern of the security threat for the Ontario region. Now, Mr. Heft, Robert Heft, is considered to be a voice of moderation, a voice of, or a solution of de-radicalization. And we just went on his Facebook, for example. I didn't go on Google, just on his Facebook, just a few days before the event with Doug Best. And on his Facebook, we're seeing the promotion of Zakir Naik. Zakir Naik is banned from entering Canada. Why? Because he basically encouraged people to join terrorist organization. He's also a promoter. He's also a sympathetic to Al-Qaeda. The second thing that we've seen on his Facebook, we've seen him in Qatar alongside Rahim Green, the individual that is so radical that is the object of investigation in England right now. His organization is also mainly Saudi funded, and they live in the headquarters in what is considered to be, right now in the most recent report, a building that is also the headquarters of the Muslim Brotherhood operating in the UK. But this being said, Rahim Green is seen with Mr. Heft, you know, an accolade. Lebuis side, and he presents him as his brother. And he went to Qatar to meet and share some of their common views. Now, the second point, so that's on the Facebook, just becoming. So there again, you're having a normal citizen who's just doing maybe what we can say some form of fact-checking about to see who this guy is all about. Then we're having another guy, that's the name of Faisal Kuti, and this one is the most disconcerting for me. Now, Faisal Kuti is basically, he was with Superintendent Doug Best, and the event, by the way, was called the Radicalization Towards Violence and its Impact on the Muslim Community. But Faisal Kuti, in the early 2000s, was the spokesperson of 2 Al-Qaeda funding organizations in the past. He was also at the head of, at the board of director for several years of what was called at the time CARE Canada, who now became the NCCM, the National Council of Canadian Muslims. He literally, in his discourse on his own, he's very prolific in his writing. He consistently defends and promotes people that are known and banned in certain countries. A person that, what's his name, Mr. Ganucci, he was trying to defend and promote him. Ganucci was banned from entering Canada right after an event that he was trying to talk about.
If we could shorten down the answers, because we have a number of other senators have questions. Senator White.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I was going to do the same thing. I appreciate you taking us on a longer path, but I'm trying to focus us on, arguably, you don't agree with one event that the RCMP were involved in Ontario.
Well, there's several other events. I just wanted to name that one because it's serious, because it's right after the 2 terrorist attacks.
So I understand that. What is it because the RCMP have been here as well and spoke to us about their engagement practice. In fact, it's very similar to an engagement practice when you're trying to deal with street gangs in a small community. You're trying to move people to somewhere else other than where they are. What do you suggest they should do?
Well, the first thing is that they should definitely verify with who they're going to do their dealings, because what we have to expect is when the RCMP or CSIS or any of a representative of national security, sensitive national security intent do, is, for example, in some of these mosques or some of the organization, when they have been doing dealings with the RCMP, then when there's a problem that comes from their community where, let's say, we found a radicalized element that comes out of it, the leader of the mosque or the leader of the organization will say, there's nothing wrong with us, we do outreach program with the RCMP. They're cloaked with an immunity that doesn't even allow sometimes journalists to be able to scratch to try to understand what's happening behind them. That gives them an immunity to be able to validate and verify why there could be inside either that venue, that mosque, that Islamic center, why there could be a radicalization program. So what I'm saying is, this immunity then gives legitimacy and creates in these individuals the status of spokesperson. Mr. Heft has been using.
So if I may, because I want to close the loop, there's a lot of questions to be asked, if I may, Mr. Chair. Just to close the loop, your issue is not so much in what they're doing, but who they're doing it with.
My issue is actually, I'll add something to that, which is fine to go see.
Sure.
Yes.
Thank you.
What I will add to this is the fact that there's now more and more demonstration, not necessarily proof, but clearly when Mr. Pierce from CSIS declared that they don't investigate mosques, there seems to be other evidence to show that there's a lot of police forces that also don't go in that direction. And there seems to be, most likely, when we're seeing in some terror attack like around Boston, there seems to be some indication that there's not even people infiltrating the mosque to be able to see and gauge if there are radical elements that may be frequenting these mosques. And if that is the case, then we're having a much heavier problem than simply the outreach program.
Okay. Thank you very much for your response.
So I just want to close the loop a little bit more on this, because I think it's very, very important. Basically, the message that you've brought here, along with other witnesses over the last number of weeks, is that in some cases there are individuals speaking for the religious institutions, saying one thing in one form and doing another in another form. So basically, it would seem to me, going forward, we're we're trying to put together a report which will have various recommendations can help and assist our law enforcement agencies and, most importantly as well, the Muslim community in respect to withstanding this very, very extreme views that are being put upon them. In many cases, I suggest in the majority of their cases, the majority of Muslims, they didn't move here to have this happen here.
Absolutely.
So I would suggest that perhaps, what do you think about this as a concept, that CSIS be required to do due diligence when people in the community are being searched out to speak for the purposes of counter-radicalization and things of that nature, to ensure that they have good standing within the moderate Muslim community and other communities that we're involved in, so that at least there's a requirement to check and do due diligence as opposed to have people like yourself going on Facebook. Could you want to comment on that?
I think that would be a good idea. The only thing I would add as a slight reservation is we got to make sure also that our institution, those who are in charge of security, we got to first make sure, because any type of solutions that we may apply, if there are elements, the slightest element that would be working for the RCMP, the CSIS, or others agencies that are in charge of security, that may have a tendency to be sympathetic to views, and they are calling us the enemy, so I'm going to use their term, that are sympathetic to views of those organizations, those institutions that are threatening us, that could have views that are sympathetic, or that can have views that are embracing, or that they may have had even friendly terms or friendly conversation with these people. Even at that point, I would make sure that we purged or that we make sure that these elements inside our institutions don't have any influence. This being said, if we have that, I totally believe that that would be extremely necessary right now, because there seems to be, like right now, the example that I gave about Ottawa, where we're having the RCMP and local police forces recruiting in venues that are known to have invited preachers that are promoting violent jihad, or that are promoting the disruption of Canadian society.
Thank you. Senator Deschenais.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lebuis. I have two questions for you. The first, since this committee has been sitting, some members of the Muslim community have said that there might be a certain form of radicalization within some teaching institutions in Quebec. Now, Quebec does teach ethics or morals classes, if you will. Do you believe that within within mosques, or some mosque in Quebec, could lead people to become radicalized? If you believe this, how seriously do you think we have to take this possibility, that is, radicalization in Quebec's mosques? Well, we know that Radio-Canada reported in September that a certain number of Canadians signed up with the Islamic State, and this led us to question as to why these young people were becoming radicalized, and several of these young people ended up in mosques or Islamic centers, or they were members of student Muslim associations. First thing. Second thing, freedom of expression is an extremely strong value, but if we want to use this value, well, we have to defend it on the one hand, but on the other hand, if some people are pushing the boundaries of free speech, I don't like talking about hate speech. I would rather frame it as inciting people to commit acts of violence. So, if we are allowing people to freely incite people to commit acts of violence, well, if we can get to the source of where this is being spoken, and if we can find out how many people are listening to these statements, well, in that case, we can take the appropriate measures, as Senator Lang suggested. In that case, we would be able to identify individuals who are eligible for funding for government programs to help integrate newcomers to Canada, and it would help us to cut the ties that bind some individuals to other Islamic groups, because they might influence the democratic life of this country. But to do this, we have to know what demagogy is. We have to distinguish between Muslims, the general population, and extremists who perceive Islam some in a non-violent way, but others in a more violent way, that is, to incorporate Sharia, and these people might try to see Sharia applied within our institutions. And if we look throughout the world, there are organizations backed by Saudi Arabia or by the Muslim Brotherhood. And what we've seen actually in these cases is that there is always a situation when there is a critical mass and the conditions are right, the use of force is justified. So if we can follow the trail, if you will, it's very important that we not fund these groups. It's important that we prevent them from entering our institutions and influencing our most important institutions. But to detect these people, we have to be able to detect the ideology which motivates them, even in the gentlest manifestation, unrolling the carpet, which might eventually lead to violence. You talked about the funding of programs. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if you heard about the following. Some people have claimed that there may have been kidnappings and ransoms have been required to fund the Islamic movement.
First of all, I don't know if you have heard about those kidnaps in order to obtain funding. If that is the case, how serious must we take this funding? And does this happen in Quebec? Yes, it happens in Quebec. We saw that this was the case recently with the status of charitable organizations. Irfan's status was revoked. Irfan then became officially an organization that was recognized as being a terrorist organization. We're talking about Irfan Canada because it funded Hamas. That having been said, yes, there's a very troubling case because this is the most significant organization, Islamic organization, that works in Quebec. Here we talk about the Muslim Association of Canada. There was a case in December 2012. One of the directors of this organization, the Muslim Association of Canada, the MAC, one of the directors kidnapped someone during the day. He kidnapped a youth, the grandson of a very, very affluent man in Quebec. What had happened was that we discovered that not only was he part of the MAC's board, and he had been so for nearly 10 years, what we also discovered was that he was in charge of the education program for the MAC. Now there's a second situation. We also know that there have been communications. This was also published in the media. There have been communications after the kidnapping, communications that were taken in by the police. Communications occurred here between this person on his phone. He called Saudi Arabia to confirm his travel to the kidnapping. We did not know what was supposed to happen after the kidnapping. Third of all, yes, what we do know is that he had demanded a $500,000 ransom. That was going to be his next step. That was his intention. This person, under his watch, had a very important role in the MAC. He had negotiated one of the most significant and biggest buildings in the area, a former SNC-Lavalin building. He had also negotiated various mosques in Canada, one of which can be found in Ontario. He had managed monies as well. He was also linked to a MAC-allied mosque in Laval. He had a role there, a very authoritative role. He invited people to come and join the festivities the Ramadan festivities in this case. He also had a role to play not only in the board, but in also a directors' council in the MAC. Within this Muslim Association of Canada, what we now know is that the MAC is one of the main proprietors of Islamic buildings or Muslim buildings in Canada, mosques and schools among others. Now he also funds a study chair in a college in Ontario. Thank you very much.
Here, I have a number of other senators. We're going to take another 10 minutes, so if we could, I'm afraid, senators, I'm going to ask you to keep your questions fairly brief, and I would like the responses fairly brief, and I will start with Senator Day.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I do recognize the timing. I'd like to thank Mr. Lebuis for being here and giving us his interpretation of facts. He's certainly much more informed about developments in the Muslim community and Islamists than I am. I think I understand his general thesis, and I think that's sufficient for me in regard to the time, so I'll withdraw any further questions, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Bayak.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Lebuis, for an excellent, well-informed and documented presentation, and for pointing out to the committee and to those watching that you're working with caring, concerned Muslims that really matter to all of us. This committee's heard concerns about the handbook entitled United Against Terrorism, produced by the Islamic Social Services Association, National Council of Canadian Muslims, and a chapter by the RCMP. In the book on page 13, a number of individuals are listed as authorities on Islam in North America. Amongst them are Ms. Ingrid Matson, Mr. Suraj Wajah, Mr. Jamal Badawai. I appreciated your distinctions between moderate Muslims and Islamists, and wonder what you could tell me about these individuals. Are they moderate Muslims or are they Islamists?
Well, there's at least two that we should have into concern, but each one of these individuals have directly or indirectly been related, or they themselves encourage a violent form of jihad, or the military branch of jihad. For example, Siraj Wahaj, who's, by the way, there was an event recently in Quebec just a couple of days ago, and the Islamic Relief Canada decided to to cancel an event where Siraj Wahaj was coming. And by the way, there was going to be 700 people attending the event, according to LCN television network. Now, this being said, on the list of individuals that come from this booklet, there's Siraj Wahaj. Siraj Wahaj is already known to be, he's a co-conspirator, non-accused or non-indicted co-conspirator in the first World Trade Center. He has accommodated the blind sheikh. There's a there's a long list of issues that are related to Siraj Wahaj, but one of them that should be really, really being of concern for us is that Siraj Wahaj in the early 1990s, right after the Rodney King riots, basically says that the disenfranchised young in the streets of American cities should be converted to Islam. Now, here's what he says afterwards. He says, once they have a proper understanding of Islam, we should equip them with Uzi guns so they can do the jihad in the streets of the United States. Now, this man, this individual, is regularly coming to Canada. He is sponsored here by the Islamic Relief on a regular basis, as we're speaking, in a lot of mainstream mosque and organization all over Canada. For example, the individuals, one of the individuals that sponsored this booklet, Shahina Siddiqui, basically in the late 90s, I think it was 1999, created a program where there was a summer camp that involves where Siraj Wahaj was going to lead this program, this Islamic this Islamic workshop session during a summer. This being said, there's another individual that we should be very aware of. There's Jamal Badawi. Now, Jamal Badawi, you may not know him, but he's extremely influential. The man is behind a load of numerous organizations that are considered to be, even by our security agencies, as being the network of the Muslim Brotherhood infrastructure in North America. He's started several of these organizations. Now, Mr. Badawi, in the early 2000, gave an interview. And that's what I said in my initial presentation. He gave an interview where he basically encouraged Muslims. Now, it's important that when the Muslim Brotherhood described the term Muslims, they described them according to their understanding of how to apply Sharia law. Some of the Muslims that came here who raised concern about the radicalization of mosques, sometimes when these individuals or these organizations from these leading organizations such as the NCCM, they do not recognize these individuals as Muslim because they don't follow the prescription that they define as the right understanding of Islam through Sharia. This being said, Mr. Badawi basically invites Muslims to become judges in order to use the discretionary power not to apply the law when it contravenes with Sharia. This individual was praised by the NCCM as being here in a Senate committee on transportation, as being, in their words, a key leader, one of the most influential leader, if not the most prominent scholars in North America. Several of the leaders in that, some of them are tied up with the Jamal-e-Islami, who is known to be a very radical organization. Some others, when you look at the entire list, we haven't found any of these individuals who have not, in an almost direct way, have linked to radicalization.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Chair.
If I could, colleagues, we have a few more minutes. I just want to ask a question. It has to do with, goes back to the financing and the charitable status, and this applies not just to the situation with religious charities, others as well.
Yes.
It's common knowledge that some money, if not a lot of money, is being raised in Canada and then being directed towards terrorist activities, in some cases Hamas, Hezbollah, and others. And it seems to me that the rules we have in place aren't necessarily working if this is taking place. Perhaps you might just have a comment on that.
Yeah, and if they are working, because we did pretty good in the last 2, 3, 4 years, we did pretty good. We finally, after almost 10 years, we revoked the charity status of the World Islamic WAMI, the World Assembly of Islamic Youth. So this is a Saudi-based, and there's.
So we on one organization.
No, we did it on several. So we did pretty good in the recent 5 years, but more can be done, and maybe the process is a little slow because there's sometimes some evidence that are pretty clear. But one of the things that we're noticing is what we could do, however, and we could extend. There's already provision in the law of that allows somebody to have a charity, and this provision is basically political discourse. You're not allowed to go lobby in Ottawa. If you're allowed to have something like around in the range of 10% of your activity should be limited to 10% of your activity should be allowing you to lobby for political reasons. One of the things that we do notice is that several of these organizations that have charity status are inviting sometimes individuals that have no religious discourse, that have mainly a political discourse. For example, Tariq Ramadan, who's extremely influential in the Muslim community in Canada, extremely influential, basically constantly and regularly gives discourses on how to deal with politics. He had an interview in 2004. He was just like Jamal Badawi, was basically targeting Canada specifically and telling the people, his audience, on how they should go about to communicate without using the term Sharia, but to use the legal system of Canada, which was, according to him, one of the easiest one to be able to work with in order to implement Sharia provisions inside the legal system. Now, there's nothing spiritual, there's nothing religious about this. This is a total political discourse. Now, this individual is regularly invited by many of these organizations, and a lot of other leaders. They're talking about laws. They're talking about how to behave within laws, within the political system, how to become militants inside political activities. And this should be monitored, and then we should find a way to be able to enforce this provision that's already part of the charity laws.
Colleagues, we're come to the end of our time. I'd like to thank Mr. Lebuis for coming forward and sharing the information that he's garnered over the last number of years, looking at a very, very important issue that all Canadians are very interested in, quite concerned about, and I would say, and as we said earlier, the moderate Muslim community, which is the vast majority of the Muslims in this country, are very concerned as well in view of the extremist views that are coming into this country and speaking on their behalf. So obviously we've got to find some recommendations and solutions going forward. Mr. Lebuis, thank you very much. We will have a recess for about 3 minutes and have our next witnesses.